The vast expanse of space was eerily silent as the freighter Starlight Echo glided through the inky void. Its hull, battered by years of asteroid collisions and harsh radiation storms, hummed with the comforting whir of its engines. Elena Ward, a seasoned pilot with the eyes of a hawk and nerves of steel, sat at the helm, her gaze fixed on the flickering control panels. She was on a routine cargo run to the outer colonies, a job that had become second nature to her after a decade of traversing the galaxy. The pay was meager, but it kept her away from the crowded cities and prying eyes of the inner worlds. Here, in the endless reaches of space, Elena found solace. It was just her ship, and the occasional nebula lighting up the darkness. But today, something was different. A piercing beep shattered the quiet. Elena's fingers danced over the controls as a red light blinked on her console, a distress signal. It was faint and erratic, suggesting it was coming from a damaged vessel. She frowned, leaning in to get a closer look. An emergency beacon, she muttered to herself. Out here in the middle of nowhere? The signal originated from a nearby moon, orbiting the gas giant known as Calexis 7. This sector was uncharted territory, avoided by most due to the unpredictable gravitational storms. Any ship that had ventured too close had been torn apart. Elena knew it was risky to approach, but she couldn't ignore the possibility that someone was in desperate need of help. With a resigned sigh, she redirected her course toward the moon. "Let's see what trouble you've gotten yourself into," she said, as if speaking to the stranded vessel. The Starlight Echo shuddered slightly as it entered the moon's thin atmosphere. The surface of the moon was a barren wasteland of jagged rocks and swirling dust clouds, illuminated by the distant glow of Calexis 7. As Elena carefully descended, her scanners picked up the faint outline of a small escape pod nestled among the rocks, half buried in the moon's regolith. It was barely functional, its metal shell scorched and riddled with holes. Elena's heart clenched. She had seen enough wreckage in her life to know this was no ordinary malfunction. It looked like the pod had been shot at. She grabbed her blaster, securing it at her side, and donned her helmet. The air outside was toxic, and she wasn't taking any chances. With a hiss, the airlock opened, and she stepped out into the thin, acrid atmosphere. Dust swirled around her as she approached the pod, her boots crunching on the rocky ground. "Hello," she called out, her voice muffled by her helmet. There was no response, only the faint crackling of static from the pod's damaged communications array. She pried open the hatch, her breath hitching as she peered inside. Two small figures were huddled together, their silvery skin shimmering faintly in the dim light. They were children no older than infants, by human standards. Their eyes, a vivid shade of blue that seemed to glow with an otherworldly light, blinked up at her in fear and confusion. "Oh, stars," Elena whispered, her heart breaking at the sight. The children were wrapped in tattered blankets, their frail bodies shivering in the cold. She could see strange markings etched into their skin patterns that seemed to pulse faintly, like the gentle rhythm of a heartbeat. Instinctively, she reached out a hand to them. "It's okay," she said softly, her voice as soothing as she could make it. "I'm here to help." The twins looked at each other, their eyes wide and uncertain. But something in Elena's tone seemed to calm them. Slowly, hesitantly, they reached out and took her hand. Their touch was cold, like touching starlight. Lifting them gently, Elena carried the children back to her ship, cradling them close to her chest. As she laid them down on a makeshift bed in the ship's mid-bay, she scanned them for injuries. The results were baffling. Their biology was unlike anything she had ever seen. They had 2 hearts, an advanced nervous system, and cells that seemed to regenerate at an accelerated rate. "What in the universe are you?" she murmured to herself. But the twins offered no answers, only silent stares that seemed to see right through her. Elena's concern deepened when she found a small data chip tucked inside the folds of one of their blankets. Plugging it into her ship's computer, she discovered a single, heavily encrypted file. After several minutes of decryption attempts, only one line of text emerged. "Protect the royal heirs at all costs." Her heart skipped a beat. Royal heirs, she whispered, looking over at the twins, who were now fast asleep, curled up together like they had done it 1,000 times before. Suddenly, the ship's alarm blared, jolting Elena out of her thoughts. The radar lit up with multiple blips, unidentified ships entering the moon's atmosphere. The distress signal had attracted unwanted attention. Great. Just what I needed, Elena muttered, rushing back to the cockpit. Whoever these newcomers were, they were closing in fast. Engaging the engines, she lifted the Starlight Echo off the moon's surface, narrowly avoiding a barrage of laser fire. The twins were jolted awake, their eyes glowing brighter with fear. Elena could feel the tension in the air, the urgency to get away. "Hold on, kids," she called over her shoulder. "We're getting out of here." With her years of experience, Elena expertly navigated through the moon's treacherous terrain, weaving between craggy cliffs and dense clouds of ionized gas. The pursuing ships struggled to keep up, their shots going wide as Elena pushed her freighter to its limits. After what felt like an eternity, they broke free from the moon's gravitational pull, hurtling into the safety of deep space. The enemy ships, unable to match the Starlight Echo's speed, eventually gave up the chase. Breathing a sigh of relief, Elena set the ship on autopilot and returned to the mid-bay. The twins were still huddled together, their eyes dimming to a soft glow. They looked at her with something that almost resembled trust. Elena crouched down beside them, brushing a strand of hair away from Lyra's face. "I don't know who you are or where you came from," she said softly. "But you're safe now." As she watched the twins drift back to sleep, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just taken a turn she could never have anticipated. She was no stranger to danger, but this felt different, like she had become part of a story that had been written in the stars long before she ever found them. Little did she know, the universe had plans for her and these mysterious children, plans that would soon pull them into a conflict that spanned galaxies and destinies. And thus, the journey of the Starlight Echo and its new passengers truly began. The Starlight Echo drifted silently through the darkness of deep space, far beyond the reach of the bustling trade routes and prying eyes of the inner colonies. The tension from the narrow escape was still palpable, but inside the ship, the air was calm, filled only with the steady hum of its engines. Elena Ward leaned back in the worn pilot's seat, her fingers tapping restlessly on the armrest. Her eyes flicked to the sleeping twins in the small cabin behind her. It had been 2 weeks since she had rescued Orion and Lyra from that desolate moon. In that time, they had barely spoken, only communicating in soft murmurs to each other in a language Elena couldn't understand. Though she tried to coax answers from them about where they came from, how they ended up stranded, or who might be after them, the twins remained tight-lipped. The only clue she had was the cryptic message from the data chip she found: protect the royal heirs at all costs. As she navigated through the vastness of space, her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden burst of static on her comm system. She frowned, flipping a few switches to clear the noise. It wasn't unusual to pick up interference this far out, but something about this frequency was odd, like it was trying to break through her ship's encryption. "Starlight Echo, do you read?" A gruff voice crackled through, barely audible. Elena's eyes narrowed. "This is the Starlight Echo. Identify yourself." The transmission wavered, filled with static, but a few words were clear: protect the heirs. Nixian Dynasty. Shadow Collective dashed before she could respond. The signal cut out abruptly, leaving behind only the hum of the ship. Elena stared at the console, her mind racing. Nixian Dynasty? The Shadow Collective? None of it made sense, but the urgency in that voice suggested that whoever had contacted her was desperate and knew exactly who was aboard her ship. With a sigh, Elena powered down the comms and turned her attention to the twins. Orion and Lyra were now awake, sitting up on their shared cot, watching her with those eerily luminous eyes. There was an intelligence in their gaze, a depth far beyond their apparent years. Elena took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice steady. "All right, kids," she said, crouching down to their level. "I need answers. Who are you really? And why are people trying to kill us? Lyra glanced at her brother, who nodded ever so slightly. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but clear. We don't remember everything. It's like pieces of a dream. She paused, her silvery blue eyes flickering. But we know that our family was important. There was a war. And we were sent away to keep us safe. Orion, the quieter of the two, added in a whisper, they're coming for us because of what we are. Elena's brow furrowed. What you are? You mean the whole glowing eyes thing? I've seen plenty of strange creatures in my time, but nothing like that. Lyra hesitated, then held out her hand. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, a faint light began to glow from her palm, casting a soft, blue radiance. It wasn't just light, it was energy, shimmering and crackling like a contained star. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Elena took a step back, her eyes wide. What in the galaxy is that? Lyra's face fell, the light fading. We don't know. It just happens. When we're scared or when we're together. She looked at her brother, who nodded in agreement. Elena rubbed her temples. All right. So, you can do that. But what does this have to do with the Nixian dynasty and these Shadow Collective people? Before the twins could answer, the ship's alarms blared to life. Elena's heart lurched. Not again, she muttered, rushing to the cockpit. The radar was lighting up with multiple red blips, enemy ships closing in fast. Looks like we're about to find out, Elena called over her shoulder. Buckle up, kids. Orion and Lyra clutched onto their seats as the Starlight Echo accelerated, its engines roaring to full power. Elena's hands flew over the controls, spinning the ship into a tight barrel roll to evade the incoming fire. Bright streaks of plasma shot past the cockpit windows, narrowly missing their mark. Whoever they are, they're not here for a friendly chat. Elena growled, pulling the ship into a steep dive. But the attackers were relentless, their sleek, black ships maneuvering with precision. It was clear they were highly trained and well-equipped, far more than your average band of space pirates. As the ship shuddered under another volley of fire, Orion suddenly cried out. Elena, we can help. Help? How? She shouted back, frantically adjusting the shields. We can do something, Lyra said, her voice trembling with both fear and determination. But you need to trust us. With no other options and the enemy closing in, Elena made a split-second decision. All right, go. Do whatever you can. The twins clambered to the viewport, placing their hands on the cool glass. Their eyes began to glow brighter than ever, and the strange markings on their skin pulsed with energy. A wave of light erupted from their bodies, expanding outward like a shockwave. The enemy ships wavered as their systems were overwhelmed, causing them to veer off course. Whatever you just did, keep doing it, Elena called, seizing the opportunity to punch through the enemy line. The Starlight Echo shot forward, breaking free from the ambush. The twins slumped to the floor, exhausted, their glow dimming. Elena glanced back, her expression a mix of awe and concern. You two are full of surprises. We're tired, Orion panted, leaning on Lyra for support. It takes a lot of energy. Elena nodded, her mind spinning with new questions, but she had no time to ask them now. All right, rest up. I'll get us somewhere safe. As the ship entered hyperspace, leaving their pursuers behind, Elena set a course for a distant sector she knew well, an old contact of hers on the planet of Andara, someone who might have answers about these mysterious powers and the Nixian dynasty. But even as she plotted the course, the words from the transmission echoed in her mind, Shadow Collective. Heirs. Protect them at all costs. It was clear that the twins were more than just refugees. They were the key to something far bigger, something that could change the fate of the galaxy. And now, Elena was caught in the middle of it, bound to these children by a promise she didn't fully understand. As the stars blurred into streaks of light around the ship, she turned to look at the sleeping twins. "I don't know who or what you are," she whispered softly, "but I promised I'd protect you. And I don't break my promises." Outside the ship, the vast expanse of space stretched on, filled with secrets waiting to be uncovered. But for now, the Starlight Echo and its newfound passengers had earned a moment of peace. The galaxy, however, was not done with them yet. The Starlight Echo burst out of hyperspace into the orbit of Andara, a remote planet on the outer rim of the galaxy. The planet's surface was a patchwork of shimmering turquoise oceans and verdant jungles, hidden beneath a thick veil of perpetual mist. It was a place Elena Ward hadn't visited in years, a world far away from the politics and chaos of the inner colonies. "Welcome to Andara, kids," Elena said, glancing back at the twins who were seated quietly behind her. Orion and Lyra had grown visibly anxious after the last ambush. Elena couldn't blame them, they had barely escaped with their lives. She herself was running on fumes, both physically and emotionally. Andara was the last place she could think of to seek refuge. Elena had an old contact here, a former Nixian intelligence officer named Soren who had gone underground after the fall of the Empire. If anyone could explain who these children were and why the Shadow Collective was so desperate to capture them, it was Soren. As the Starlight Echo descended through the dense clouds, they caught glimpses of ancient ruins jutting out from the jumbled canopy remnants of a forgotten civilization. The ship finally touched down on a secluded landing platform covered in vines, hidden deep within the forest. Elena powered down the engines, letting out a sigh of relief. "All right, we made it. But stay close," she warned the twins as they disembarked. "And keep your powers under control. We can't afford to draw any more attention." The humid air was thick with the scent of moss and alien flowers as they made their way through the dense foliage. Elena kept her blaster ready, her eyes scanning the shadows for any signs of danger. Orion and Lyra walked close behind her, their eyes wide with wonder at the vibrant, unfamiliar world around them. After a short trek, they arrived at a hidden entrance camouflaged within a cliff face. Elena pressed a series of buttons on an old, rusted panel, and a hidden door slid open with a hiss. They stepped into a dimly lit corridor that led to a vast underground chamber. "Soren, it's me," Elena called out. The sound of her voice echoed through the cavern. A tall, gaunt figure emerged from the shadows, his eyes glinting like a predator's. Soren was older now, with graying hair and a network of scars crisscrossing his face, but his presence was just as imposing as Elena remembered. "Elena Ward," Soren said, his voice as smooth as silk. "I never thought I'd see you again, especially not with the galaxy falling apart." "We need your help," she said without preamble. She gestured to the twins. "These kids. They're special. And someone wants them dead. I think they're connected to the Nixian dynasty, but I don't know how." Soren's sharp eyes zeroed in on Orion and Lyra. He knelt down to their level, his expression softening ever so slightly. "So, it's true," he murmured, almost to himself. "The Heirs survived." Orion and Lyra exchanged a confused glance, while Elena felt her heart skip a beat. "Heirs to what, exactly?" she demanded. Soren stood up, his gaze never leaving the twins. "These children are the last surviving members of the Nixian royal family," he explained. "Their parents were the rulers of an empire that spanned entire star systems. But when the Shadow Collective orchestrated a coup, the empire fell. The royal family was slaughtered, but it seems these two were smuggled away in a last-ditch effort to save the bloodline." Elena's mind reeled. "You're telling me these kids are royalty?" "Not just royalty," Soren corrected. "They are the rightful heirs to the Nixian throne. And if the Shadow Collective gets their hands on them, they will be used as pawns to legitimize their rule over what remains of the Nixian territories." Lyra's eyes widened in fear. "We don't want to be rulers," she whispered, clutching Orion's hand. "We just want to be safe." Soren's gaze softened. I'm afraid you don't have a choice, young one. As long as you live, you are a threat to the Shadow Collective. They will stop at nothing to eliminate you. Elena crossed her arms, frustration bubbling to the surface. So, what's the plan, Soren? We can't keep running forever. They keep finding us no matter where we go. That's because they have a way to track the twins, Soren said grimly. The markings on their skin are not just decorative. They're embedded with nanotechnology, a kind of ancient Nixian biosignature that the collective has learned to exploit. Elena's eyes widened. So, they've been tracking them like a homing beacon this entire time? Precisely, Soren nodded. We need to disable it. There's a device hidden in the ruins of the old Nixian capital that can deactivate the nanotech signatures. But getting there won't be easy. The planet is now a stronghold of the Shadow Collective. Orion's face tightened with resolve. We have to go, he said. We're tired of running. If this is the only way to stop them, then we need to try. Lyra looked scared but nodded in agreement. Elena felt a surge of pride and fear. These kids were braver than most adults she had met, but they were still just children. She couldn't let them walk into a war zone alone. All right, Elena said, her voice firm. We'll go to the ruins. But if we do this, we do it my way. No unnecessary risks. Soren nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. I wouldn't expect anything less from you, Elena. The next day, they set off in the Starlight Echo, heading toward the Nixian homeworld. As they exited hyperspace, the planet loomed before them, surrounded by a blockade of Shadow Collective ships. The once beautiful world was now scarred with crumbling cities and scorched landscapes. This place used to be magnificent, Soren said quietly, gazing at the ruins below. The capital was a beacon of culture and knowledge. Before the war, Elena deftly navigated through the blockade, using old smuggler tricks to slip past the patrols. As they approached the surface, the air grew thick with ash and debris. The capital city, once a gleaming beacon, now lay in ruins, its majestic spires reduced to rubble. The team made their way through the desolate streets, sticking to the shadows to avoid patrols. As they neared the ancient palace where the deactivation device was hidden, a sudden explosion rocked the ground beneath them. Shadow Collective soldiers emerged from every direction, their blasters trained on the group. Ambush! Elena shouted, firing back as Soren drew his own weapon. The twins, fueled by adrenaline and fear, instinctively activated their powers. Waves of light erupted from their hands, temporarily blinding the attackers and creating a shield around their group. Go! Soren yelled. I'll hold them off. You need to get to the device. Elena hesitated, but there was no time to argue. Grabbing the twins by the hands, she led them into the depths of the crumbling palace. They sprinted through dark corridors, the sound of gunfire and explosions echoing behind them. Finally, they reached a massive chamber, where a large, ancient device sat in the center. Lyra and Orion instinctively placed their hands on the device, and their markings began to glow brighter than ever. The machine hummed to life, sending a pulse of energy through the twins. With a blinding flash, the nanotech in their skin was deactivated. The twins collapsed to the ground, exhausted but relieved. The tracking signal was gone. But as Elena helped them to their feet, the ground trembled. The Shadow Collective had found them, and they were closing in fast. We're out of time. Elena shouted. We need to get back to the ship. As they made their way back, they were met with a grim sight. Soren lay on the ground, wounded but alive, surrounded by the bodies of fallen enemies. Did you disable the signal? He asked weakly. Lyra nodded, tears streaming down her face. Yes, but they're still coming. Soren managed a pained smile. Then it's time for you to go. I'll hold them off here. Elena hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Thank you, Soren. For everything. With the twins in tow, she sprinted back to the Starlight Echo, leaving Soren behind to buy them precious time. As they lifted off, explosions rippled through the city below. The Shadow Collective's forces were relentless, but without their ability to track the twins, they were now flying blind. As the ship broke through the atmosphere, Elena turned to the exhausted twins. "We did it," she said softly, trying to reassure them. But deep down, she knew the war was far from over. The Shadow Collective had lost their tracking method, but they were not defeated. The galaxy was on the brink of chaos, and Orion and Lyra were now more than just children, they were symbols of hope. As the stars stretched into streaks of light around them, the twins huddled together, their hands clasped tightly. The battle had only just begun, and the galaxy was waiting for its rightful rulers to rise. But for now, they had won a brief, precious moment of peace. The Starlight Echo glided through the tranquil darkness of space, leaving behind the ruins of the Nixian capital and the bloody skirmishes they had narrowly survived. For the first time in days, there was a rare moment of calm. The twins, Orion and Lyra, lay asleep in their bunks, recovering from the intense exertion of deactivating the tracking nanotech that had marked them for death. Elena Ward stood at the helm, staring out at the stars beyond the cockpit glass. Her mind was racing. The children were no longer merely refugees she had taken in, they were the rightful heirs to a lost empire, and their survival could change the course of the galaxy. But with the Shadow Collective still out there, it was only a matter of time before they came for them again. As the ship drifted in orbit around a remote gas giant, a soft chime echoed through the cockpit. It was a message, encrypted and originating from deep within Nixian space. Elena's fingers flew over the controls, decrypting the transmission. The face that appeared on the screen made her heart skip a beat. It was the Los, the mysterious figure who had first alerted her to the twins' true identity. "Elena," the Los said, his image flickering. He looked bruised and weary, clearly on the run. "I don't have much time. They've taken over the citadel of Nixia. The Shadow Collective knows you disabled the twins' trackers. They're desperate now, and they're preparing a final assault to crush the resistance." Elena leaned forward, her jaw tightening. "We barely escaped last time, the Los. What do you expect us to do? I have children aboard, children you dragged into this mess." Thalos's eyes softened with something that looked like guilt. "I know, Elena. But they're not just children. They're the only hope we have left. There's a way to turn the tide, but you need to find the key of Solara. It's the last artifact that can activate the lost throne of Nixia. With it, the twins can reclaim their rightful place as rulers. Without it, we are doomed." Elena's heart sank. The key of Solara was a myth, a relic whispered about in old Nixian legends. According to the stories, it was hidden in the heart of a collapsing star system, surrounded by deadly gravitational fields that had swallowed entire fleets. "Where do we even begin to look for it?" she asked, her voice low. The Los glanced over his shoulder, clearly hearing something outside the range of his transmission. "I've sent coordinates. It's in the Ordos Nebula, but be warned, the Shadow Collective knows about it too. They won't stop until they've destroyed the twins or turned them into their puppets." He paused, his gaze intense. "Elena, the galaxy is at a tipping point. If you fail, there won't be a second chance." The screen went black as the transmission cut out. Elena sat back, her mind spinning. She had sworn to protect Orion and Lyra, but this mission was nothing short of suicidal. Still, she knew they had no other choice. If the Shadow Collective won, the entire Nixian galaxy would be plunged into darkness. A few hours later, the twins joined her in the cockpit. Orion looked at her with his usual calm resolve, while Lyra's eyes were wide with fear. "What's going on, Elena?" Orion asked. "We heard you talking. What's this key of Solara?" Elena took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "It's a device, an ancient relic from your people's past. If we can find it, it will give you the power to reclaim your throne and unite the Nixian resistance against the Shadow Collective. Lyra bit her lip, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. But we don't want to be rulers. We just want to live in peace. Orion placed a comforting hand on his sister's shoulder. Lyra, if we don't stop them, they'll never stop hunting us. We have to try. Elena watched them, her heart aching. These were just kids, thrust into a galactic war they had no part in creating. But they were also their people's last hope. We're heading to the Ordos Nebula, Elena said. Her voice steady. It's going to be dangerous, but it's our only shot. The journey to the Ordos Nebula was grueling. As they entered the nebula's swirling, iridescent clouds, the ship's sensors went haywire, and turbulence shook the starlight echo like a leaf in a storm. The gravitational anomalies of the dying star system pulled at the ship, threatening to tear it apart. But Elena was a seasoned pilot, and with her skill and the twins' newfound ability to manipulate energy fields, they managed to stabilize the ship. As they navigated deeper into the nebula, they came upon a massive, crumbling space station orbiting a dying star. It was ancient, with Nixian symbols etched into its rusted hull. This is it, Orion whispered, his eyes glowing faintly with anticipation. I can feel it. The trio disembarked, their footsteps echoing through the empty, decaying corridors of the station. Lyra held tightly to Elena's hand, while Orion walked ahead, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of the artifact. Suddenly, a deep, rumbling voice echoed through the halls. I see you have finally arrived, children of Nixia. Stepping out of the shadows was a tall figure clad in black armor, the leader of the Shadow Collective, Lord Valek. His eyes glinted with a cold, cruel light as he regarded the twins. You truly are more resilient than I expected. But this is where your journey ends. Before they could react, Valek raised his hand, and a wave of dark energy surged toward them. Orion and Lyra instinctively combined their powers, creating a shield of light that absorbed the attack. The clash of energies sent shockwaves through the station, causing parts of the ceiling to collapse. Elena, go! Orion shouted. Find the key. Elena hesitated for a moment but saw the determination in his eyes. Trusting the twins to hold their ground, she sprinted deeper into the station, guided by the faint pulsing of the key's energy. She finally reached a chamber at the heart of the station. There, floating in a beam of light, was the key of Solare crystalline artifact glowing with a soft, golden light. Elena reached out, her fingers grazing the surface, and the key responded with a surge of warmth. Grabbing it, she raced back to the twins, who were barely holding back Valek's relentless assault. Orion. Lyra. I've got it. Orion turned, and as Elena tossed the key to him, the twins touched it together. A brilliant light erupted, enveloping the entire station. The markings on their skin pulsed with ancient power as the key activated, creating a ripple that resonated through the nebula. Valek screamed as the light overwhelmed him, his dark energy dissolving into nothingness. The station trembled, and a powerful shockwave spread outward, disabling the Shadow Collective's fleet stationed outside the nebula. Back aboard the Starlight Echo, they watched the aftermath from the safety of space. The Shadow Collective's blockade was in disarray, their ships drifting aimlessly. For now, the galaxy had been granted a brief reprieve. Orion and Lyra stood together, their eyes reflecting the light of distant stars. We did it, Lyra whispered, her voice filled with both relief and exhaustion. But what happens now? Elena put a hand on each of their shoulders. Now, you take your place as the leaders you were born to be. But you won't be alone. I'll be here with you, every step of the way. The twins looked at each other, a silent conversation passing between them. They were no longer the scared children Elena had found in that escape pod. They were rulers, ready to reclaim their throne and unite their people. As the Starlight Echo set a course for the Nixian Citadel, now free from the Shadow Collective's grip, the stars stretched into brilliant streaks of light around them. The journey was far from over, but the first steps had been taken. The galaxy had found its lost heirs, and a new dawn was breaking.